First of all, I just want to thank everyone for joining today's web conference on deciphering the 2022 point in time count data. My name is Rachel Glassman, and I'm the Corporate Partnerships Officer here at Miriam's Kitchen. Before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. As a reminder, you probably heard the recording in progress. So this web conference will be recorded, and we have everyone muted for the duration. If you do have a question, please do put it in the chat and we will address those both as we go and within the Q&A at the end. If you have any questions in follow-up, my best questions always come the minute we sign off. So feel free to reach out to me and we can get you more information or share ways to get more involved in Miriam's Kitchen. To kick us off, let me introduce our presenters today. I'm joined by Adam Rocap and Andrea Scallon. Adam is our Deputy Director and has been with Miriam's Kitchen since 2007. Adam supports our direct services programs and our advocacy work, which helps achieve our mission. Andrea has been our Director of Measurement, Evaluation, and Learning since 2017 and has been on staff with Miriam's Kitchen since 2013. Andrea enjoys making data pretty and actionable, as well as working with all of our programs and departments here at Miriam's Kitchen. So I will just turn it over to the two of you to dive right in. And again, just as a reminder, if you do have questions, please do put them in the chat box and we'll address those.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to be here, spending some time talking about the 2022 point in time count and sort of what that means for sort of Miriam's Kitchen's mission to end chronic homelessness and sort of what's, as we're all working together as a city to end chronic homelessness and all homelessness, you know, what it tells us about that. So we're gonna do a short kind of overview of what is the point in time count, how does it work, share some of the data and trends, but really want to focus most of our conversation on hearing what questions that we've sort of already heard have come in or things that you guys have in the chat. So be sending those in as we go along. All right, so the first question is, you know, what is the point in time count? So the point in time count is a once a year count of everyone who's experiencing homelessness. So, and it's not just a DC or a DC region thing. The point in time count happens all across the United States every January. So a little of where the history of where it came from was that the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is one of the lead agencies from the federal level on homelessness, you know, wanted to make sure that we were, all communities were tracking trends about what was happening in homelessness. And so they sort of set a week in January where communities across the country, anyone who like receives funding from HUD, which is most communities around the country, has to do this point in time count. And that's really like our best consistent set of data about how homelessness has been changing over time. So here locally, our point in time count is coordinated by the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness. So they are the entity where the HUD funding, federal funding comes to the Community Partnership, and then the Community Partnership sends the funding out to all the different housing providers. And so because of that role and because they operate the HMIS system, which is the Homeless Management Information System, sort of the one shared database that all providers in DC have, they're like a really great natural role to coordinate this count every year. And it includes both like an actual count of people, like a survey, or like a count of people like a census, but it's also, there's like a short survey that goes along with the count for any of people experiencing homelessness that are willing to participate in the survey. So we can also get a little bit more qualitative information each year about not just the number of people that are homeless, but more information about them. So who's counted in the point in time count? So the point in time count includes, you know, anyone who's experiencing homelessness on that one single day in the DC area. And we actually coordinate the DC region, the DC and most of the counties that are surrounding DC all do the count on one day. And that's, a lot because that way, like someone wouldn't get counted if they were staying in DC one day and then, went out to Montgomery County the next day. If we were doing counts on different days, they might get counted twice. So just the whole region does the count on a single day. And people who are counted as experiencing homelessness is anyone that fits HUD's definition of literal homelessness. So someone who's staying outside in an unsheltered situation, people who are in shelters, if you're in other like a car or places that aren't unfit for human habitation, transitional housing facilities. When you put all that together, that's what gives us the sort of total count on a single day of how many people are experiencing homelessness in DC. Other groups of people that the general point in time sort of also counts, but doesn't become part of the, like how many people are experiencing homelessness on a given day, are people who used to be homeless and are now in something like the Miriam's Kitchen permanent supportive housing program, where you're in an apartment with rental assistance and you have a case manager from Miriam's Kitchen who's helping you with whatever you're working on and staying stable in housing. We do also like keep a regular count of how many people who are formerly homeless are sort of still part of the homeless services system. But we're going to focus more on like what the counts say and what do the trends say about like who's experiencing literal homelessness at any given time. A lot of people sometimes when they think of the point in time count, their mind first goes to having heard about just the unsheltered count. So that's that first bubble on the screen. Because it's a little bit more invisible. Like if people are staying in shelters or in transitional housing, it's not like people walk around the shelter with a survey and do a count. I mean, if you're staying in a shelter or a transitional housing program, you're sort of already in that program's database and they can just run a report that's the count of everyone who's staying in those programs. The kind of more visible version of the point in time count is the way we do an unsheltered count every year. And what happens is that there's a lot of like staff from outreach programs, like the Miriam's Kitchen outreach program or outreach teams from other agencies, plus a lot of community volunteers who all go out in one evening from, let's say, about like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And, we'll have mapped out the city in different catchment areas, and everyone's small team is responsible for kind of walking around and seeing who's sleeping outside that we can find in any of those areas, making sure we count that person, and then trying to do the survey with them. So that's an important part of the count, but it's actually, a very small percentage of the people who are experiencing homelessness on a given day are actually staying outside. But it's like the most intensive part of the count. And then the other way Miriam's Kitchen like practically participates is through like our meal program that we have for breakfast and dinner every day. We know, and the community partnership knows that, there's people who are sleeping outside who aren't necessarily sleeping in a place that the average volunteer would be able to find, but they might come to Miriam's Kitchen the next day for breakfast. And so we also, the day after the unsheltered count, do surveys with anyone who's willing to participate, both for understanding more about like the Miriam's Kitchen specific population and demographics, but then also to help contribute to catch and count someone who was sleeping outside but wasn't counted in the overnight count. And then lastly, before we look at some of the trends from the 2022 count and over the years, just asking ourselves, why is the point in time count important? Why is it something that we do anyway? And I think its biggest value is that it helps us see from year to year what's happening with homelessness. Is it going up? Is it going down? what's happening with subpopulations, like what's happening with chronic homelessness. Is chronic homelessness going up or down? What's happening with veterans? You can imagine there's, any sorts of, smaller groups where you'd want to look at trends. The kind of why the point in time count is one of the most helpful tools for looking at change over time is it's the count that has happened very consistently every year for many years. So it has a lot of the point in time count has a lot of drawbacks. One, you can only learn so much from looking at one data point for one day in the year. The fact that I know how many people were experiencing homelessness in DC on a particular day in January is helpful, but it's missing, who's coming in and out of homelessness during other parts of the year. What are the, the trends if you were to, look at a much broader sample. The point in time count does miss a lot of people, like it has its definitions, but you kind of, when we look back on it, say, but for over time, it's like the one count that has happened very consistently over the years. So it gives us that trend information. So really the way I think of it is, the point in time count is one of our ways to measure the progress that we're making in what's happening. And that there's other tools and other ways that we look at the data of like what's happening in shelters every day over the course of the month and over the year. There's like other ways that we can look to trends and get data. And then we just focus on using the point in time count for what it's good for. And I think I mentioned like part of, what's helpful about the survey, and it's more than a count, is that it does help us, understand more about the experiences of people that are currently homeless, what sort of health conditions, those sorts of things. And then, as I mentioned earlier too, we use it when we do the point in time count surveys in our day center with our meals. Not only gives us more information about the guests who come to Miriam's kitchen specifically, but that's a time and a place when we can ask for feedback about our own services. So if we're already going to be offering a general survey, and we want to be constantly getting feedback from our guests so we can improve our programs, it's a great time to do that. And I'd say my last sort of thought on why the point in time count is important for Miriam's kitchen and specifically is that we have very intentionally said that our vision is to end chronic homelessness in DC. And we take that really seriously. We design all of our programs and try to get all of our efforts aligned and our advocacy aligned to ending chronic homelessness. But you can't do effective work if you're not measuring the vision that you're trying to achieve. So even though it sometimes feels daunting that Miriam's Kitchen is tying its success to, in some ways, like a change that's beyond our total control. I mean, we don't touch everyone with our services who experience homelessness in DC, but between our programs and an advocacy, we really are holding ourselves accountable to wanting to see chronic homelessness go down, and then eventually here, hopefully before too long, be a thing of the past, be something that does not look like what it looks like right now. So we in particularly do look and care about the point in time count, because that's like our ultimate kind of way that we measure ourselves across all our programs. So looking just quickly before we go into questions, a little bit about what the trend data is for 2022 and like over the past 10 years or so. So this is a chart that shows three things. One, the top blue line is, each year in January, what are the total number of single adults experiencing homelessness? And what that means for our system in single adults is, people who are adults who don't have children living with them. So there's like a different part of the count that focuses on families and counts like the number of adults and children and families. The green line in the middle is the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness. And for anyone that isn't familiar with the definition of chronic homelessness, I mean, in its most simple version, I think of it as, someone who has been experiencing homelessness for a long time or repeatedly. The sort of technical definition is if you've been experiencing like 1 year or more continuously, and 4 episodes in 3 years, and there becomes all these sort of definitional things. But I always just go back to someone who's been experiencing homelessness for a long time or repeatedly. And that's where we'll kind of look at a chart, each one that's looking at what happens with these trends. But then the last line is around the number of veterans experiencing homelessness. So looking at each one a little bit more closely, you can see in some ways this has been, for many of the years, this was sort of one of the most discouraging trends to watch, was that, the number of single adults experiencing homelessness was always hovering somewhere like it was in 2012, around over 3,700 people to maybe close to 4,000. But it's a pretty flat line where there wasn't a lot of big picture progress that was happening. The exception being this was the first year when we did the count in 2022, when the number of single adults experiencing homelessness was down to 3,400. So we obviously want to see that line much lower, trends going in, down a lot faster, but it was the first, and what I found like a much more hopeful count that things were going in the direction that we'd want. Chronic homelessness, which is the measure that we focus on the most specifically, has over the years has been on more of a steady downward trend. And I think a lot because of the advocacy that Miriam's Kitchen has led around more funding for housing in the city budget, because we know that housing is what ends homelessness, and in particular, permanent supportive housing is what really is very effective for someone who's been homeless for a long time or repeatedly. So just this past year in 2022, the count of people experiencing chronic homelessness on any given day is the lowest that it's ever been since we've been like consistently counting chronic homelessness. So just in 2022, the number was 1,260. So that was amazing news, and we were really excited about it. It followed a year last year when, for the first time in a long time, chronic homelessness had gone up to 1,618. So that was a tough year, and we were asking ourselves a lot of hard questions about, is this COVID? What's happening? We just need to keep, pushing. And then this past year, the chronic homelessness was down. And so, but the nice one is, with data, it's very hard when you just have like 10 or 11 data points. You can't overread any particular year to year change, because there can just be a lot of variation in what exactly happens with the count. But if you look overall at the trend, things are going in the right direction from, close to 2,000 people to now we're getting, closer to 1,000 than we are to 2,000, which is really exciting. And then the other big area over the years where we've seen a lot of great progress is on veterans who are experiencing homelessness, where back in 2012, the number of veterans on any given day was a little over 450, to just over the past 2 years, we're either just below 200 or just over, which is a huge drop and is a huge success. And really, the veterans story kind of captures what works to reduce and end homelessness, where kind of from back in 2013, 2014, that's where like Miriam's Kitchen in the city started having a very particular focus on reducing and ending homelessness for veterans, being smart about how we knew every veteran by name, how we were making sure to offer housing to every veteran who we were engaging. And that was really only possible because veterans was the one main group that the federal government was investing a lot of housing funds for. And there was also local investments for veterans that Miriam's Kitchen helped make possible in some of those early years. But it's really, you start to see this recipe of like with a focused goal on veterans and adequate funding, you can see these big downward trends. And the numbers, the trends that you see on chronic homelessness are similar, where we've had a real focus on chronic homelessness. We've been more successful in our advocacy with chronic homelessness than just sort of all single adult homelessness overall. Like we've been able to get a lot of, thousands of units of housing in the budget and many millions of dollars. Never enough to like offer everyone who's experiencing chronic homelessness housing, but we've been consistently able to connect people to PSH. And so again, when you have this focus and the funding, that's when you can see trends in the data where things start moving in the right direction. So those are some of the highlights, and then we'll kind of come back for questions. But, I guess having looked at all that, what's on the horizon? What's kind of exciting about watching the downward trend about chronic homelessness is the impact of our budget advocacy, which was in 2022, which was our biggest budget advocacy win ever, where there was, around 2,500 slots of permanent supportive housing that are available to people in DC. That we haven't even actually seen much of the impact of that investment in that win in the data yet, because we did the most recent count we had was from January 2022. So a lot of the resources that were just starting to become available in fall of 2021 haven't translated into people moving in yet, because it takes a while for providers to staff up for the new resources, to match the resource to people, for someone to like put in their housing application, find an apartment, move in. So really, in some ways, what I'm most eager to see is the point in time count in 2023, because that's where we'll finally get to test at scale our theory of, not so much does housing end homelessness. We know that's the case on the individual level. We see it, lives change, over and over again, repeatedly, all the time. But this theory that if we invest at scale close to the need, that we will see big drops in homelessness. So that's what we're expecting. That's what we want to see. But Andrea and I are data people, and Miriam's Kitchen is very focused on the data and these metrics. So we want to measure it and see it happen. So I will stop there. Andrea, is there anything that you'd add from overall from the points that I was laying out before we jump into the specific questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to give some perspective to the change in the trends that we're seeing. So for all single adults, we saw a 12% decrease from 2021 to 2022. For individuals experiencing chronic homelessness is a 12% decrease. And then veterans, it was 11% increase, but still a huge decrease over time. So just wanted to add that perspective of different ways to read the numbers.
Great. So one question that I see in the chat, which is a great question, is around, how does DC compare with other urban areas in the US in terms of like the number or percentage of people experiencing homelessness and trends over time? So I should have more of that sort of at my fingertips to know exactly how we compare. But in general, I know nationally that there's a lot of variation, even when you look in large cities, on what's happening on homelessness, right now. I mean, overall, over the past 10 years, there has sort of been a general, steady, slow decrease in homelessness that matches a lot of the trends that you see in DC, like family homelessness decreasing, chronic homelessness going down, veteran homelessness going down. Like we match if you were to look at all like the full US national trends, we're pretty similar. I think there's some areas where we are outperforming, like doing better on veteran or chronic than some places, but pretty similar to the overall national trend. But when you start looking at like big metropolitan areas separately, can be very different stories. like what's very much in the news right now is like how like along the West Coast and like big cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, you know, have been seeing homelessness increase over the past few years rather than stay steady or decrease. I think it might be similar in New York City. Basically, all of that very directly ties to the cost of housing. So anywhere where not only is the cost of housing, you know, where you have a lot of people who are have low income and have to pay, you know, 30, 50% or 50% of their income or more for housing, that's very hard and puts a lot of people at risk of becoming homeless. But if that's also true in a place where the actual like absolute rent level is like your median apartment is 2,000 or more, that's where we see like the biggest variation in cities that are seeing like increases in homelessness. So what I find very encouraging about the work that we're doing here in DC is, you know, even though DC is not necessarily as expensive as some parts of like New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, I mean, we are a very expensive rental market. So the fact that even when we know that that's the biggest driver of why you see homelessness, you know, increase or decrease in a city, just is tied to how much does the rent cost. That even in the midst of like a high rent environment, that because, you know, we're successful in our advocacy for dedicated housing programs and doing a lot of work as a whole city system to be smart about reducing and ending homelessness, it's like even more exciting that we're seeing some of the, you know, steady declines that we're seeing. I want to see them go faster. I mean, I don't love the, you know, chronic homelessness is just going steadily down, and I think these new investments, we could see a big drop, but we're going in the right direction.
Another question that I see is in terms of when we anticipate seeing the impact of the additional vouchers, and is there any data that we're tracking between now and that point to like show whether we're going in the right direction?
Yes, great question. Yeah. So again, what we're really excited about is this big influx of vouchers or permanent supportive housing units, like housing slots for people experiencing chronic homelessness, that I think we will mostly see like a big impact in the January 2023 point in time count. So that's probably like, since that's the number where we track change over time historically very well, like that's where I really want to see an impact show up there. But again, it's not the only tool that we ever look at. So, you know, within just the single adult homeless services system in DC, as a system, we actually track every month, you know, what were the total number of people who we saw who touched the homeless services system the entire month, and look at trends at what's happening there. How many people did we house? Is that number going up and down? And that's where it's good, because whenever you're trying to do systems change, you need regular feedback from these data points about whether what we're doing is working or not working. Where is the system moving too slow? So there's sort of a monthly report that everyone looks at together across provider, like the all single adult system together. Now, what would you add, Andrea, around sort of other ways that we're sort of regularly monitoring progress?
Yeah, there's also in the same system, it's also, we've done this year with all the number of vouchers, we've added some additional tracking of there's key steps, right? From someone being able to have a voucher and steps that they take along the way to make that happen. And we're monitoring progress and looking at numbers each month and cumulatively to make sure that there is progress in that process as much as we can.
Another question about the vouchers themselves is, does the point in time count take into account the number of individuals who are already matched with the voucher? For example, if someone is unhoused in January, but they're matched to a voucher, are they still counted in this count?
Yeah, for the purpose of the point in time count, that person would be counted as someone who's experiencing homelessness right now. Because even though they're matched to a voucher, or maybe they're even like submitting apartment applications on that point in time, for that snapshot, they were experiencing homelessness right then. And that's where, when I was talking about, there's parts that are really helpful about the point in time count. There's a lot of things where there's missing data and it doesn't tell you much. And so really you want to look at a lot of different data points at the same time. So kind of that dashboard that I was describing for the whole single adult system, where we're tracking how many people are touching the single adult system every month. In that dashboard, we do know how many people are matched. We're watching, how long is it taking people from the time they're matched to a housing voucher to the time they move in on average, to like project forward. Okay, what do we think? Are we going to see a decrease in homelessness over the next couple months? How many new people are coming in? That's the sort of the more like complex dashboard that we look at, that has more of that kind of nuance about how many people are matched and what's going on within the system.
Helpful. I'm just kind of scanning through. Another question is, in terms of the survey itself, how is it administered? What types of questions are on the survey? And can someone refuse the survey?
Do you want to take that one, Andrea?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, there's different, back on the graphic of the different circles, like it's done differently for each of those populations. For the unsheltered account, yeah, it's led by outreach teams, so teams that are already in the community, have coverage areas, know a lot of the individuals in those areas, but also volunteers, and those volunteers get training, answer questions, and so the questions vary. It's kind of like any survey you take. There's always these demographic questions that you get asked, but then also it asks about previous experiences, and what has led them up to becoming homeless, experiencing homelessness. And then I'm forgetting the last section. But then also, yes, for every question asked, there is an option that the guest can refuse to answer, or even they don't know. So it's always self-select for the information that they want to provide, and we just want to know all that they're willing to ask or to answer. For the day centers and the meal programs, then it's a similar survey, just so we can have the same information if they did not get counted the night before. But then, as we mentioned for Miriam's, we take this opportunity to ask our own questions around any feedback about our services.
And we offer, during the unsheltered count at night, the outreach workers or volunteers have gift cards as incentives and a thank you for participating in the survey, if they want to do that. And then we mirror that similarly in our day center, both to increase participation, but also just to recognize that people are taking some of their time to answer a survey. It's a lot of personal questions, so wanting to make sure that we're appropriately thanking people for participating.
And there's also, I believe, an observational survey as well if someone chooses not to participate. Is that correct?
Yeah, specifically for the unsheltered count, yes. If someone just doesn't want to be bothered, or like the individual, the volunteer doing the survey doesn't feel safe approaching, there is an observational. I saw this person, they're in the, and describe the situation of where they were, what they were wearing, and any identifying information.
And that way, someone who didn't participate in the survey is hopefully still participated or like part of the count when we're just looking at the count of total people, even if we don't know everything about them. And then the community partnership on the back end does a lot of work to sort of deduplicate to make sure as much as possible that no one's getting counted twice. So that's like, you know, whatever identifying information that we have for people to make sure if, you know, if someone was clearly counted twice, they take that out. But again, you know, also, you know, they have different methods so that it's as accurate as possible.
Another question here. When it comes to the 2023 point in time count, when will that occur? And if someone were to want to get more involved, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, it's always in January. So the next count will be in January 2023. We don't know till closer to like November, December, like when the DC region is picking like what night, whether it's January 25th or 28th, you know, whatever it is. It's usually that sort of towards the end of January. And then if you are interested and want to stay in touch with us, we always, whenever the community partnership is sharing like details of how to sign up and volunteer, we share that out with the Miriam's Kitchen supporters, anyone who might be interested in volunteering. So just staying in touch with us is a good way if you're interested on how to get plugged in if you want to participate in the unsheltered count next year.
We'll give everyone 2 more minutes, and if there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I just want to thank Andrea and Adam for giving us this great overview and making us all a little bit smarter about the point in time count and how it works. It's always good to know how the data informs our programs and how it's useful to the greater community.
And I'll just also want to say thank you to all of you who are coming in here and wanting to learn more and are interested, because, you know, Miriam's Kitchen can't do the work that we do to, on an individual level, help people get housing, find the healthcare that they need, additional income. Like none of that's possible without our supporters. You know, whether it's giving financially, volunteering, getting involved in advocacy, like the advocacy that happens at the local level has a huge impact, you know, in addition to all our programs, and none of that's possible without you. So the fact that people are here and want to learn more about the actual data and how we're measuring it, just, I think, speaks to the fact that you all are on this journey with us about wanting to see this change in the city and are part of making it happen. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again. I really appreciate you all joining in and being such a good audience. We'll be sending out the recording afterward. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to be in touch and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. And if you'd like to get more involved, also feel free to be in touch. Like Adam said, there's lots of ways to get involved between advocacy and volunteering, and just spreading the good word about what we do. It makes a big difference. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.